What if I told you that the familiar image of medieval travel from movies is a dangerous lie? We are used to seeing heroes galloping easily across green meadows, but the reality was more like a never-ending nightmare where every step could be your last. Medieval roads were not places for leisurely strolls. They were hostile territories that killed with cold, hunger, and uncertainty. People of that era viewed leaving the gates of their hometown as a real game of chance with death, for which they prepared for years. The chronicles and diaries of merchants tell us not of romance, but of icy winds that pierced to the bone and nights spent in fear under the open sky. Archaeologists find the remains of those who never reached their destination, frozen to death just a few miles from the safety of home. It was a world without maps, navigators, or rescue services, where despair was often the only companion. Watch the video to the end to find out why even a short trip to visit neighbors required preparation comparable to a modern polar expedition. Are you ready to learn the truth about what stopped travelers more often than bad weather? We often think that the main problem was robbers or the lack of roads, but in fact, people were constrained by laws and borders. The medieval world was not a unified space, but a patchwork quilt of thousands of small estates, each living by its own rules. A traveler could not simply get on a horse and ride wherever his eyes took him, as he would be stopped at the first bridge. He needed dozens of permits, travel documents, and letters of introduction just to cross the neighboring valley. Obtaining these documents was a long and exhausting process that could take weeks before the journey even began. A person had to prove who they were, why they were traveling, and what they were carrying in their bags. Local lords saw every stranger as a potential spy or a threat to their peace. Not having the right papers with the right seal meant not just a fine, but imprisonment or expulsion. People waited at the gates of castles for days, hoping to get the coveted piece of parchment that would open the way forward. There was a concept of iron law that allowed the local ruler to confiscate the property of a stranger if he died on his land without a will. This forced people to draw up detailed documents before leaving, distributing their property among relatives. The very fact of preparing for the road was reminiscent of preparing for death, which cast a gloomy shadow over the mood. No one was sure that they would be able to return and exercise their rights. Legal traps were set everywhere, and circumventing them was more difficult than physical obstacles. Even clothing could cause serious problems at the borders of various feudal estates. Some lands had laws against luxury, prohibiting commoners from wearing certain fabrics or colors. A traveler dressed below his station risked being accused of fraud or impersonation. He had to carry a change of clothes with him to comply with the laws of the area he was crossing. This added extra weight to his luggage and complicated his already difficult life.
25 coppers, as agreed.
In addition, there were strict rules regarding which currencies could be imported and exported. Coins from one duchy could be considered counterfeit or prohibited in a neighboring county. Travelers had to constantly look for money changers, losing huge sums of money on the exchange rate. We must not forget the language barriers that arose every few dozen kilometers. Dialects changed so quickly that a resident of the north might not understand a resident of the south of the same country at all. This made communication with guards and officials difficult, creating fertile ground for dangerous misunderstandings. Travelers had to hire guides or translators, which further increased their expenses. Being unable to speak in a foreign land was worse than physical infirmity. Religious holidays and fasts, during which movement could be completely prohibited, presented a particular challenge. On such days, the city gates were closed, and no one could enter or leave until the celebrations were over.
It's freezing.
Travelers who did not calculate their time correctly found themselves locked outside the walls without shelter or food. They had to wait for mercy from the locals or seek shelter in the forest. The calendar became as important a planning tool as the map. This entire system was designed to control the movement of people and profit from it. The freedom of movement we are accustomed to today was an unattainable dream for people of that era. Every step required permission, payment, and humiliating explanations to those in power. The road was not a symbol of freedom, but a corridor with 1,000 doors, each of which required its own key. It is interesting to see how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world. Where are you from? Do you agree with the arguments presented?
Are we certain the castle is this way?
Are you ready to learn the truth about how cold killed faster than any weapon? Winter travel in the Middle Ages was not just difficult, it was practically suicidal. Roads that were muddy ruts in summer disappeared under thick layers of snow in winter. The landscape changed beyond recognition, erasing all landmarks and turning the world into a monotonous, white desert. Travelers found themselves trapped in an icy silence, where the only sound was the crunch of snow underfoot. The clothing of that time did not provide adequate protection from prolonged exposure to the cold and wind. Woolen cloaks would get wet from the snow and then freeze, turning into an icy shell that restricted movement. People put on everything they had, but the cold still penetrated their clothing. With each passing hour, the body lost heat, movements became sluggish, and thoughts became confused. It was a slow decline that a person might not even notice until it was too late. The lack of quality footwear for such extreme conditions was a huge problem. Leather boots quickly froze and the soles slipped on the ice, making every step a dangerous ordeal. Travelers wrapped their feet in rags and straw, trying to retain at least a little warmth. Frostbite of the toes was common, often leading to serious consequences. A person who lost the ability to walk was doomed to perish in the snow. The ice on rivers and lakes was a treacherous and unreliable bridge that could collapse at any moment. In winter, crossings became the only way to get across, but it was impossible to guess the thickness of the ice in advance. Spending the night in winter became a difficult task of staying alive until dawn. Building a fire in strong winds and deep snow was an art that not everyone could master. People huddled together in tight groups, trying to warm each other with their body heat. Sleep was light and restless, as falling into a deep sleep was deadly dangerous. The morning often brought terrible discoveries when one of the companions did not wake up. Food turned to stone in the cold, impossible to chew. Bread and meat had to be warmed up in one's bosom or over a low fire. The body required a huge amount of energy for warmth, but the diet was meager and monotonous. Hunger intensified the effects of the cold, making people weak and apathetic in the face of the elements. A constant feeling of malnutrition was a faithful companion of the winter traveler. Daylight hours were short in winter, which greatly limited travel time. Travelers had to get up before dawn and find shelter long before sunset. Moving in the dark through a snow-covered forest or field was tantamount to suicide. Every hour of daylight was worth its weight in gold, and they tried to use it as efficiently as possible. Winter nights seemed endless and full of hidden dangers. Even horses, man's faithful helpers, suffered from the cold and lack of food no less than humans. Deep snow exhausted the animals, and the icy crust cut their legs. The death of horses left travelers without transportation and no chance of getting their cargo to its destination. A person left on foot in the middle of the winter steppe was practically doomed. Caring for the animals became a priority on which the life of the entire group depended. The winter road did not forgive mistakes, weakness, or poor preparation for the route. It was a test of endurance that only the most resilient and fortunate could withstand. Survival depended on small things. In the next chapter, you will learn where and how people found shelter when there was not a single house around. Guess how long it took to find a safe place to sleep in a medieval forest? The problem of finding accommodation faced travelers every night, and it was much more complicated than simply stopping at a hotel. Inns were few and far between, often absent for hundreds of kilometers. People were forced to improvise, creating shelters from what nature provided. They had to sleep under bushes, in ravines, or under the roots of large trees. The most desirable but rare option was monasteries, which allowed travelers to stay overnight. However, it was not easy to get there. The gates closed at sunset, and those who were late were left outside. Inside, they slept on straw in a common hall, where it was cold but at least dry and safe. The stone walls provided a sense of security that was so lacking on the open road. Such lodging often had to be paid for with labor or donations. If there was no monastery or castle nearby, travelers would look for haystacks in the fields of peasants. This was risky, as the peasants could mistake them for thieves and chase them away. Nevertheless, dry hay retained heat well and allowed them to survive the cold night. People burrowed deep into the haystack, creating a kind of burrow for themselves. The main thing was not to fall asleep too deeply and to hear the approach of the field owners. In mountainous areas, caves or rock shelters that protected from the wind became a refuge. However, such places could already be occupied by other travelers or wild forest dwellers. People carefully checked the cave before settling down for the night. A fire was lit at the entrance so that smoke would not accumulate inside and at the same time scare away uninvited guests. Sometimes it was possible to negotiate a place to stay in a peasant's hut or barn. This was very fortunate, but the peasants were distrustful of strangers from the road. They were reluctant to let travelers in, often locking them in a separate room without windows. They had to pay for a place under the roof with food, news, or small items. The warmth of the hearth was worth any humiliation and bargaining. Sleeping in a cart was another option if the traveler had their own transport. The space inside was filled with belongings, leaving only a narrow gap for a person. A thick tarpaulin was stretched over the top to protect from precipitation, but not from the cold. The wagon was cramped and uncomfortable, but it created the illusion of personal space. The wheels were often removed or blocked so that the wagon would not roll away at night. The worst option was to spend the night in swamps or damp lowlands. Moisture soaked through their clothes and the cold penetrated to the bone, preventing them from warming up. In such places, it was impossible to build a fire, and people sat in the dark, waiting for dawn. The dampness brought on illnesses that manifested themselves after several days of travel. They tried to avoid such places at all costs, even if it lengthened the journey. Group overnight stays in the open air required strict discipline and organization. Guards were always assigned to watch the fire and the surroundings while the others slept. Sleep was in shifts so that the camp was never left unattended. Trust in your companions was the only guarantee that you would wake up in the morning. A lone traveler in such conditions had virtually no chance of a peaceful rest. The journey turned into a series of survival from sunset to sunrise, like if you are impressed by the resilience of the people of that time. Want to know a secret that will change your perception of roads? The concept of a road in the Middle Ages was very different from what we see today. Most often, it was simply a beaten strip of mud winding between fields and forests. There was no asphalt, cobblestones, or even gravel on most routes. Rain turned these paths into impassable swamps, where cartwheels and horses' hooves got stuck. Roads passing through dense forests, where branches closed overhead, were particularly dangerous. During the day, it was dim there, and the soil never dried out completely due to the lack of sunlight. Tree roots intertwined across the path, creating natural traps for hooves and wheels. In such places, movement slowed to a minimum and tension rose to the limit. The forest road was like a green tunnel from which it was difficult to escape. Bridges over small streams and ravines were often destroyed or in disrepair. The wooden planks rotted, and the supports were washed away by water during floods. Travelers had to repair the crossings themselves or look for a ford, risking getting their cargo wet. Each water barrier became a serious obstacle, requiring time and effort. The reliability of engineering structures was extremely low. Mud was a constant and exhausting companion on any medieval journey. In winter, the frozen mud turned into sharp stone ridges that broke wheels and crippled feet. The ruts left in the fall froze, making the road uneven and dangerous. Dust in the summer was another extreme, clogging the eyes, nose, and lungs of travelers. Huge clouds of dust rose with every step, making it difficult to breathe. Clothes and faces were covered with a gray crust, under which it was difficult to recognize a person. The road was a living thing that changed with the seasons and the weather. It could be a friend leading you home, or an enemy trying to keep you from getting there. Knowledge of the nature of the road was valued above gold and passed on by experienced merchants to their sons. In the next chapter, you will learn what exactly people carried on their shoulders. Every item taken on the road had its own weight, and this weight had to be carried on one's own back or on tired animals. Medieval travelers could not count on finding shops along the way, so they took everything they needed with them. The basis of their luggage was food: dried meat, hard cheese, sacks of grain or flour. These products were heavy, but they guaranteed survival far from settlements. Water supplies in flasks and wineskins also added considerable weight. Clothing took up a lot of space, as it was necessary to be prepared for any weather. Woolen cloaks, spare tunics, thick trousers, and spare shoes were packed into bundles. Wet clothes were useless and dangerous, so they were kept in waterproof bags. The fabrics of that time were thick and heavy in themselves. Washing clothes on the road was a luxury available only during long stops. Tools for repairing and setting up camp were essential cargo. Weapons for self-defense also added extra weight to the total load. A sword, a dagger, perhaps even light chain mail, or a helmet to protect against a sudden attack. This iron weighed down their shoulders but gave them a false sense of security. Maintaining weapons in the field required oil and rags, which also had to be carried. The weight of steel was the price they paid for a chance to survive. Money was carried in the form of heavy coins hidden in various parts of luggage and clothing. Gold and silver had physical weight, and a large sum could weigh several kilograms. Purses were hidden on the body, sewn into the lining of cloaks, or at the bottom of grain sacks. The constant fear of losing or being robbed forced people to constantly check their hiding places. Wealth was a heavy burden in the literal sense. Medical supplies were primitive but essential: bandages, ointments, herbs, alcohol. People understood that any scratch could become infected. An illness on the road was a death sentence. Medicines were stored in special boxes, protected from moisture and light. Knowing how to use these supplies was an important part of preparation. Goods for exchange or sale formed the basis of the merchant's cargo. Fabrics, spices, tools, jewelry. All of this had to be packed and protected. The loss of goods meant financial ruin and the futility of the entire journey. Merchants constantly repacked and checked their bundles. The cargo was the purpose of the journey, but also its main curse. Personal items reminiscent of home also found a place in the traveler's bags. Small icons, letters, combs, or memorable trinkets helped maintain emotional balance. The ability to pack things properly was an art that took years to learn. Poorly packed cargo could rub against the animal's back or scatter while in motion. Packing was a daily ritual on which the success of the day's journey depended. Are you ready for the shocking truth about what people feared most? In the Middle Ages, the forest was not a place of rest, but a territory of increased danger, where a threat could lurk behind every tree. Bandits and robbers were not a figment of fairy tales. They were a real force controlling vast stretches of road. They acted quietly, preferring ambushes to open confrontation, using the element of surprise. Travelers entered the canopy of trees with bated breath, peering into the thick foliage. The tactics of attack were worked out to the smallest detail. A fallen tree across the road stopped a carriage or horseman. While the travelers tried to deal with the obstacle, armed men emerged from their hiding places. They surrounded their victims, cutting off their escape routes and depriving them of any possibility of maneuver. Robbers often had informants in cities and inns. They knew in advance who was traveling, what they were carrying, and what kind of guards they had. A traveler could be doomed even before leaving the city gates. Information was the main weapon of the criminal world, allowing them to choose the easiest and richest targets. The clothing of robbers often did not differ from that of ordinary peasants or woodcutters, allowing them to blend into the crowd. They could approach a traveler under the guise of beggars or merchants to assess his protection. The enemy did not always look threatening. Sometimes he smiled and offered help. Recognizing the threat before the attack was a difficult psychological skill. At night, the danger increased many times over, as darkness was the attacker's ally. Campfires were visible from afar, serving as a beacon for those seeking easy prey. Travelers tried not to build large fires or hide them in depressions in the ground. A lone traveler was the most desirable prey, so people tried to travel in caravans. A group commanded respect and made robbers think twice before attacking. However, in a large group, it was more difficult to maintain secrecy and speed of movement. The choice between the speed of a lone traveler and the safety of a crowd was an eternal dilemma. Social connections on the road were formed instantly for the sake of survival. The Forest Brothers often used the terrain to their advantage, driving their victims into swamps or ravines. Their knowledge of the area gave them a huge tactical advantage over outsiders. They could disappear as suddenly as they appeared, melting into the thicket. Pursuing bandits in their native forest was a hopeless and dangerous endeavor. The forest was their home and their fortress. Psychological pressure was part of their tactics. Whistling, shouting, or banging on trees created panic. Frightened victims made mistakes, lost control of their horses, or dropped their cargo. Sometimes the robbers only demanded payment for passage, becoming a kind of illegal customs office. By giving up part of the cargo or money, it was possible to save one's life and continue on the way. It was a kind of agreement, which, however, could be broken at any moment. Negotiations with bandits were a delicate diplomacy on the verge of life and death. The most frightening thing was that there was no help to be expected, as the guards rarely ventured deep into the forest. The law ended where the trees began, and only the law of force prevailed. The traveler was left alone with his fate and his fears. In the next chapter, you will learn how people overcame water obstacles without bridges. In the Middle Ages, rivers were not only transport arteries, but also formidable obstacles for land travelers. There were catastrophically few bridges, and they were built only in large cities or on strategically important routes. Most rivers had to be crossed by wading, which was always risky. Finding a safe place to cross required the experience and knowledge of local residents. Choosing the wrong ford could result in the loss of a cart or the entire load. The depth of the ford changed depending on the season and rainfall, making familiar places unrecognizable. What was an ankle-deep stream in summer turned into a raging torrent in spring. Travelers had to wait for days for the water to recede, losing precious time. The elements dictated their own schedule, which was impossible to argue with. Patience was the only tool against high water. Even in summer, the water temperature could be low, causing cramps in people and animals. Crossing the icy water required enormous effort and willpower. Clothes got wet, loads became heavier, and bodies went numb from the cold. After crossing, it was necessary to dry off quickly, which was not always possible. Water took away heat faster than wind or snow. The riverbed often concealed hidden dangers: pits, sharp rocks, snags, or sticky mud. A horse could break its leg by falling into a crevice or get stuck in the mud in the middle of the stream. Ferry crossings existed, but they were expensive and often unreliable. Ferrymen could jack up the price, seeing the traveler's desperate situation, or refuse to transport them in bad weather. The ferries themselves were crude rafts that rocked and took on water. The river's current was a powerful force, capable of sweeping away even a heavy cart. Ropes had to be used to secure the crossing from the shore. Coordinated teamwork was necessary to keep the cargo afloat. Fighting the current required physical strength and an understanding of hydrodynamics. The river was a living enemy that did not forgive weakness. Protecting the cargo from water was a separate problem that required ingenuity. Goods were wrapped in oiled skins or lifted to the top of the carts. However, water still found its way in, spoiling flour, fabrics, and gunpowder. Damaged cargo could cause rot and the loss of all profits. In winter, the ice on the river could serve as a bridge, but it was also a deadly trap. Cracks, open water, thin ice under the snow. All of these posed a threat of falling through. Crossing the ice required extreme caution and weight distribution. The sound of cracking ice was the most frightening sound for a winter traveler. Successfully overcoming the water barrier was perceived as a blessing of fate. The river taught respect for the forces of nature and humility. Medieval travel was an incredibly slow process, stretched out over an eternity. A distance that we can cover in an hour by car today took several days of exhausting travel back then. The speed of a caravan was determined by the speed of the slowest cart or the most tired pedestrian. On average, it was possible to cover no more than 20-30 kilometers per daylight hour, and this was considered a good result. Time flowed differently, becoming viscous and sticky, like road mud. The reason for such slowness was not only bad roads, but also the condition of the transport. Weather conditions could completely halt travel for several days or even weeks. Heavy rain turned the road into a river, making travel impossible. Travelers were forced to sit in shelters, waiting for the ground to dry. These forced stops depleted food supplies and people's patience. Nature dictated its own rhythm, which had to be obeyed. The need to give animals rest also greatly limited the speed of travel. Horses and oxen could not walk without a break all day long. They needed food, water, and rest. Overloaded animals quickly became exhausted and could collapse, leaving travelers without traction. Caring for animals was more important than the desire to reach the destination faster. A living engine required careful treatment. Daylight hours were the only time for active travel, as it was impossible to travel at night. In winter, when the days became shorter, travel time was reduced to a few hours. This forced travelers to use every minute of daylight as efficiently as possible. Darkness put an end to the day's journey, regardless of where people were. The sun was the main clock of that era. The information vacuum also slowed down travel, as people did not know what lay ahead. News of a destroyed bridge or bandits arrived too late, when it was already impossible to turn back. Time had to be spent on reconnaissance or searching for guides. Not knowing the situation forced people to move cautiously, feeling their way. The speed of information was equal to the speed of the slowest traveler. Illnesses and injuries among the group slowed down the entire caravan. It was impossible to abandon a sick companion, so they had to slow down or make long stops. The lack of qualified medical care prolonged recovery. The human factor was one of the most unpredictable speed limiters. Everyone's health affected the schedule of the whole group. Bureaucratic delays at borders and checkpoints took up a lot of time. Inspections, document checks, and disputes over the amount of duty could last for hours. As a result, the journey became a way of life, not just a move from point A to point B. People got used to the slow pace, the constant delays and difficulties. Patience became the main virtue of the traveler. The road was long, but it taught endurance and humility in the face of circumstances. Travel in the Middle Ages was not only dangerous, but also ruinous for anyone. Money melted away at an incredible rate, going to pay endless fees and duties. Every bridge, ford, or section of road passing through a lord's lands had its price. Tax collectors stood at every strategically important crossroads, demanding payment for the right of passage. It was a legalized form of robbery against which it was impossible to defend oneself. The prices of food and fodder for horses on the road were many times higher than in the cities. Local residents took advantage of the traveler's desperate situation, inflating the cost of even the simplest products. It was considered good luck to buy bread or oats at a fair price. The need to constantly exchange currency led to significant financial losses. Money changers took their percentage for each transaction, and the exchange rate was always unfavorable to the traveler. The variety of coinage systems created confusion, making it easy to cheat strangers. Money lost its value simply by crossing the border. Financial literacy was as important as the ability to wield a sword. Bribes were an integral part of any travel budget, bribing a guard so that he would not inspect the cargo too thoroughly, or an official to speed up the issuance of documents. Without these informal expenses, one could be stuck in one place for a long time. Corruption was the lubricant that kept the wheels of travel turning. Repairing equipment and transport required constant investment. The services of a blacksmith, carpenter, or saddler were expensive, especially if they saw that you had no choice. A broken wheel could cost as much as an entire cart in your hometown. Maintenance on the road was a goldmine for craftsmen. A breakdown was a financial disaster. The cost of lodging, even the most modest, also drained the wallet. A place in a stable or on the floor of a common room cost money, not to mention a hot meal. Free lodging was a rarity for which one had to pay in other ways. Comfort, however minimal, was a commodity. Sleep had its price. Insurance as we understand it today did not exist, so all the risks fell on the shoulders of the traveler. The loss of cargo, a horse, or a purse meant complete financial ruin with no possibility of compensation. People risked everything they had when they set out on a journey. The stakes in this game were as high as possible. There were no guarantees of a refund. Hiring guards or guides was another expense, often necessary for survival. Professional mercenaries were expensive, but their presence could scare off bandits. Fines for violating local laws, which a traveler might not even be aware of, were commonplace. Violations of dress, trade, or behavior rules were punished with a hefty fine. Local authorities took every opportunity to replenish their coffers at the expense of outsiders. At the end of their journey, many found that their expenses exceeded all their expected income. Travel was an economic challenge that could ruin even a wealthy person. The ability to count and save was a key survival skill. Financial ruin was as frightening as physical death.
The cost we've paid.
Orientation in the medieval world was a complex intellectual task that required unique memory and intuition. Maps existed, but they were rare, expensive, and often schematic, more like works of art than navigational tools. Most travelers had to rely on verbal descriptions and their own powers of observation. The world in a traveler's mind was built from stories, rumors, and personal experience. The ability to read natural signs replaced the compass and navigator. The position of the sun, the direction of the wind, the moss on the trees, and the flow of rivers were all letters in the book of nature. An experienced traveler could determine direction from the most insignificant details of the landscape. This was knowledge accumulated over generations and passed down from father to son. Losing touch with nature meant losing one's way. Memory was the main repository of information about the route. It was necessary to remember forks in the road, prominent rocks, dangerous places, and water sources. Forgetting a detail of the description could cost one's life, as there was no one to ask for directions. People trained their memory by memorizing long sequences of landmarks. The head was the most reliable data archive. Rumors and news received from other travelers were a valuable resource. Travelers exchanged information about road conditions, the presence of robbers, or epidemics. This data was fragmentary and often contradictory, requiring analysis and verification. The ability to separate truth from fiction saved many from misfortune. Information was the currency with which they paid for safety. Intuition, or the sixth sense, often became the deciding factor in choosing a route. A sense of danger, distrust of a random traveler, or a premonition of bad weather saved lives. It was a subconscious generalization of experience that worked faster than logic. Trusting one's instincts was a necessary quality for survival. The inner voice was louder than external advice. The fear of getting lost was a constant companion, weighing on the psyche. The realization that you were alone in unfamiliar territory, without communication or help, caused panic. The ability to remain calm and think clearly in stressful situations was more important than physical strength. Panic killed faster than hunger or cold. Self-control was the basis of mental stability. Visual memory of faces and places helped avoid danger and find friends. Recognizing a swindler you had seen in another city or remembering a kind innkeeper was a useful skill. The world was small, and you encountered the same faces again and again. Social navigation was part of general spatial orientation. People were landmarks just like mountains. Religious symbols, roadside crosses, and chapels served as important navigational points. They not only showed the way, but also provided spiritual support, reminding people of civilization. They were beacons of faith in the wild ocean of nature. Spiritual geography overlapped with physical geography, creating a complete picture of the world. Faith helped people go where the road was not visible. The perception of time and distance was subjective and depended on fatigue and the landscape. The ability to calculate one's strength and time before sunset was critical for planning a night's rest. A mistake in calculations led to a night in the forest. The internal chronometer was tuned by years of practice. Time was measured in steps and heartbeats. Each traveler's mental map was unique and constantly changing. It was supplemented with new data, corrected by experience, and erased by time. It was a living document that existed only in the human mind. To lose one's mind meant to lose the map and disappear into the vast world. The mind was the main compass. We immersed ourselves in the harsh reality of medieval travel, where every step was a struggle for survival. These were not walks through picturesque places, but real expeditions for survival, requiring courage, patience, and wit. Cold, dirt, bureaucracy, and the constant threat from people and nature made the road the most dangerous place on Earth. But it was these difficulties that forged character and made people appreciate the warmth of home, in the reliability of a friendly shoulder. The history of travel is a history of overcoming the impossible for the sake of a goal.
Possible.
What would you like to see in the next videos? Suggest your topics and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.